Garret Biss. Really great conversation talking with Garret. So Garrett's a veteran, and he of the Marine Corps. He flew C-130s in Afghanistan. Really cool plane. Kind of he says the sporty cargo plane, which is true. But he now helps people. He helps the transition of going from, the military to civilian life. He is a recovery coach. He has a tremendous TEDx speech, Unspoken Trauma All Veterans Face, where he talks about three essential components. Be the connection, express your truth, and of course the third one, which is really simple but really meaningful, which you'll find shortly. But just really down to earth, talking about the difference of the military life, becoming a civilian. When you see a veteran and you say thank you for your service, do you think they mean it? Do you think they appreciate it? I ask them about that too. But just a generally warm person. I ask, he at his lowest points, he asks his friends to take the firearms from his place. 19 million veterans, 22 veterans a day commit suicide. It's horrible. How can we help as civilians? How can we help our friends, the veterans? It's a great conversation with Garret Biss. Really appreciate his time. Thanks for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Garret Biss, and I'm excited to talk to you. How should civilians appreciate and understand veterans, especially the ones with trauma?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, kind of through my experience, I don't know how far back you want me to go, but as I transitioned from the military, unfortunately, I faced a reality that too many veterans face, which that transition from military service itself was a transformative and often in many ways looked at as a traumatic experience in the life of a veteran. Fortunately, I found some great coaching and some guidance and mentors to help kind of pull me through that. But all along the journey, I was always kind of like looking back over my shoulder, like, what the heck was that I went through? And I wanted to gain greater clarity on it. I went on to study, applied positive psychology and human development, personal development. And what I began to understand was that the reason that transition is so traumatic for many individuals is because of the loss of fundamental human needs, or the way that veterans have come to meet certain fundamental human needs, which is stripped away from them. We're not prepared for it. It's very sudden. It's unexpected. And it's unexpected for a couple of reasons. One, because they spend so much time and energy kind of conditioning and training us to do our role in the military. They don't spend much energy or concern at all on that transition on the backside. So that's one reason it really catches you off guard. And the other is, when you enter the military, you're 18 to 22 years old. So really your understanding of the world and your understanding of yourself and your place in that world is really being developed. Well, you wouldn't think as somebody in their late 20s or late 30s, as they transition out, you're like, okay, I'm an adult. I've got experiences. You wouldn't think that it was such an abrupt shift to this kind of new reality. One way I talk of it, I think of it as like a delayed or a second adolescence, because in many ways, as you're trying to find yourself in the civilian world, it's much like when you're 18 years old and you leave home or you leave college and you're trying to find yourself in that real world. So there's a lot of challenges there. And that's the biggest thing I really want veterans and non-veterans to understand, is that regardless of what a military member experiences while they're in the service, that transition from the service itself can be traumatic. And it comes back to these basic fundamental human needs and the way that they were met, and now that transition that takes place.
Do you want to connect with business leaders and engage consumers who take action? The Joey Pinz podcast delivers high-impact conversations to an audience of decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals across multiple industries. A fast-growing audience of highly engaged listeners, both B2B and B2C. Millions of listens and views across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Brands that sponsor us see real engagement, conversations, and brand loyalty. Whether you're looking to sell a service, promote a product, or establish thought leadership, our sponsorships offer premium ad placements, exclusive episode sponsorships, full season branding, and event partnerships. Don't just advertise, become part of the conversation. Visit us at joeypins.com/sponsor to get started, or email us at sales@joeypins.com. Joey Pinz Podcast, where thought leaders, brands connect. You gave a riveting TEDx, Unspoken Trauma, All Veterans Face. Really, really cool the way, you set that up, and you really have kind of 3 points that you bring home. It's, be the connection, express your truth, seek more joy. Let's talk about those 3. So it's profound.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. For anybody that's interested, you can view that TEDx talk. You can go to unspokentrauma.vet, and I'm sure you'll share a link in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
That was the best that I could articulate what I had experienced, what I became to understand about that transition was that it comes back to those basic fundamental human needs. So we're humans, we're animals. We all have basic needs that every other animal has: food, water, shelter. But as humans, we also have additional needs for our emotional well-being. First and foremost is our need for connection. Humans, we're tribal creatures. We do our best when we're part of a group, when we have a sense of belonging, when we have part of a tribe. There's not many of us that could really fully go off grid and survive, very less thrive by ourselves if we didn't have connections with others to help provide the community, help provide the resources that we consume, and provide the safety and security that comes from being part of a group. So that first need for connection is really, it's hardwired into our bodies. There's some recent studies that came out. The Surgeon General's report that was recently released talked about how lack of proper social connection has the same adverse effects on our health and on our longevity as smoking 15 cigarettes or drinking 6 or more alcoholic beverages every day. It would be no shock to anybody to realize that smoking 15 cigarettes or drinking 6 alcoholic beverages every day might have some negative impact on your overall well-being, on your longevity, on your health in general. But they've shown some studies that those people that don't have proper social connection experience many of those same adverse effects on their health. So connection, it's not a nice to have. It's not something that, just adds a little flavor or joy to our life. It's a fundamental human need that we have for our emotional well-being. The other need that I touch on in the TEDx talk, was our need for authenticity. So if connection is our permission to be part of a tribe, and it's that where we find that sense of belonging, authenticity is our permission to be a part of that tribe and show up just as we are, with all of the strengths and all of the flaws that we have, to share what we think, to ask for what we need, to share how we feel without fear that it will jeopardize that connection. And I've, talked to a lot of audiences, and I always ask, can you remember a time where there was something that was on the tip of your tongue, or maybe something in mind, and you realized you better not share this thought or this feeling that you have, because somebody might look differently at you. It might affect your relationships at work, your personal relationships. So instead of sharing that thing, you decide, okay, this is, it's an authentic feeling. It's true. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's something, a feeling that we have, maybe a desire that we have, maybe a need that we have that we don't feel is being met. But instead of sharing that, we'll bottle that up, or we'll wear a mask to cover that part of our true self, so that we don't lose that connection. We don't want our coworkers to be angry at us. We don't want the public to think certain things about us. Maybe it'll affect our job opportunities in the future. So it can be a natural tendency to cover these things up or hide these things, because it comes from this fear that it's going to cost us those connections that we need for our emotional survival. Well, the challenge is, as we wear these masks, as we cover up parts of our true self or our authentic self, as we fear that if people knew certain things about us, it would change the way that they think about us and might jeopardize those connections. So as we put on these masks in order to sustain connection, unfortunately, it has adverse effects. Because if I'm wearing a mask and I'm hiding something from you, you're not connecting with me. You're connecting with this mask that I wear. You're connecting with this version of myself that I'm presenting. So not only do I not receive the safety and the survival and the comforting feelings of that connection, it actually starts to create adverse effects of fear or
Hmm.
of shame. Because if I have to wear a mask in order to be accepted, then that means, whether we're realizing it or not, we're also sending ourselves a signal or a message that there's something wrong with me just the way that I am. So as we try to navigate these connections and maintain these connections, if we do it in an inauthentic way, it actually has a negative impact or negative effects that cost us those connections that we're trying so hard to create or sustain.
And then seek more joy.
Yeah, so seeking more joy, this comes back to the role of meaning in our life. So I used to think that meaning was something that was, it could add some flavor, it could add some joy, it could add some context to our life. Humans were meaning seeking creatures. Anytime we experience something or engage in something, we like to know, what does this mean in the grander scheme of things? Later, I've come to understand that meaning is not just something that helps provide that context or that clarity or that joy, but meaning is also what provides our capacity to endure suffering. I read a lot into the work by Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was the famous Holocaust survivor who went on to write the book Man's Search for Meaning. And what he shared in there through his observations and his experience, he realized that those individuals that had a strong sense of meaning, they also had a stronger will to live. They also had a greater capacity to endure some of the suffering that they faced. And when I think of this in the context of a transitioning service member who's had such profound sense of meaning, many individuals that join the military, they do it because they can't think of any greater calling or any greater source of meaning than stepping forward, serving their community, protecting their loved ones back at home. And when you take that sense of meaning away, you're not just taking away that direction in their life, but you're also taking away their capacity to endure suffering. And the reality is, life goes on. There's always going to be ups and downs in life. There's always going to be new challenges that we face. That's no secret to anybody. But if you've lost that capacity, if you've lost that foundation that helped you overcome hard times in your life, then even when the normal or those repetitive or those common challenges come up, you might not have the capacity to deal with it as constructively or positively as you once did.
Garret, how did you arrive at these three? Connection, authentic, be authentic, and then express your truth and seek your joy. How did you arrive there?
Well, just kind of looking back at my own journey and some of the things that kind of came together to help provide or help me recreate a foundation for emotional and mental well-being, and then just a lot of reading, studying, and thinking about and talking about these
Mm.
different needs and the way that they show up, and realizing that if we could distill everything down, like if we could distill all colors down into the primary colors, I found ways that every other need or desire that we have in our life can stem back to a projection of or a relation to these three basic needs.
Hmm. And as far as doing the TEDx talk specifically, how long did you prepare for that? I mean, why do that?
Yeah, it's a
It's a
great
lot of work.
question. So I don't know. I had something on my vision board for many years, and I kind of had this seed planted long ago, maybe 10 years ago, that someday I'm going to have some message that I want to share. But it wasn't until more recently that I became really clear on what that message was that I wanted to share. And the TEDx, I mean, it was a great opportunity to get a simple, digestible message out there. Also, as an individual that has I've worked, done a lot of work in the addiction recovery field. I do a lot of work as a consultant and a trainer in the mental health field and personal development field. So there's a whole, there's libraries of things that have influenced my life and have interested me. But it's a great challenge to figure out, like, what if you only had 10 minutes or 12 minutes to talk, like, what's that one core message that you'd
Mm.
like to relay? So it was a great process in kind of trimming away all the fat, like, what's one core truth or one simple message that I could share. So for that reason, I mean, that was a big reason or motivation to do it, like, just to be challenged in that way, to codify or to distill down a very important message, and then also leverage the platform of TEDx. I mean, it's a globally recognized brand, so leveraging that platform to help share a message that I really feel is important to get out there, and I wish more people knew and understood.
So, Garret, you enlisted in '99. I believe you actually left high school a little earlier. You graduated earlier to do so. You left the Army in 2015, but you were a
Whoa, whoa,
C1.
whoa, whoa, whoa! left the
Sorry?
Marine Corps in 2015.
Oh my goodness, what did I say? I'm so sorry.
No,
Marine
no
Corps.
problem.
Yes, yes, my mistake, please. But you were a C-130 pilot in Afghanistan. I'm a private pilot myself. That must have been incredible. Those C-130s
It,
are great machines, great birds.
yeah, I say they're a very sporty cargo plane
Yeah, they are.
because they are. I mean, their takeoff performance, their landing performance, it's all incredible. And I mean, that was such a. I mean, sometimes I have dreams that they call me back, and I think like if I could go back to that experience in my life. Of course, it came with a lot of negative things as well,
Yes,
and a lot of challenges and a lot of transformative experiences. But when I think back to that time, those couple of months, being surrounded by other service members that I really adore and really appreciate it, and having that opportunity to do flying that you'll never get to do anywhere else in the
right.
world. It's really Indian country in some ways, the way that we perform in those aircraft. And maybe you can appreciate this more than other non-pilots, but I flew more than 400 hours in a 6-month debt. And
Wow.
those, when you think about it, it's not, when you think of a C-130, typically you think of like long haul flights. Yes, we would do a lot of, 6, 7 hour like logistics missions. But in Afghanistan, the way that, they used a lot of aircraft to transport things even 20 minutes away because of the severity of the threat of using the roads and the IEDs, it was just much safer and much more predictable to use air. So we might fly a 1.2 or a 1.5 that included 4 or 5 landings on night vision goggles doing tactical arrivals. So the level of proficiency that you have
Mm.
and the connection that you feel with the aircraft and with your crew after an experience like that, we can only wish, or I can only wish that I'd ever get back to that level of proficiency and professionalism of marine aviation.
Mm. And why not pursue aviation in civilian life?
For a couple different reasons. Really, the biggest one was I didn't want somebody else to own my life anymore. So
Mm.
when I got to the end of my time in the Marine Corps, I was actually offered an early retirement as they were doing some force shaping measures and trying to reduce the size of the military footprint. So they offered me an early retirement, and up until that point, so at the time that I selected for early retirement, I had a daughter that was 4 years old, and when I added up all the time I'd been gone, it was more than 2 years of her life.
Wow.
So that, it really kind of gave me perspective on how much, though I love flying, though I loved being a C-130 pilot, this thought of somebody else owning my life and dictating, which holidays and which major events I would miss and when I'd be on the
Mm.
road and not, it was a huge reason that I decided to find another path.
And Gary, you talk about, that transition period, which I want to elaborate a little bit more. So you get back, and the statistics that you cite are astounding. It's 20. I guess the statistic is 22 veterans a day, but you're saying it's more than that.
Mm,
56%. There's about 19 million veterans right now, and at your despair, your friends over, you tell them to take the gun away from your apartment. You were just kind of comfortable. You got comfortable with the thought of suicide, and
yeah.
it's just tell like when we have a friend that we think is in this area that is there, what can we do to help, if anything?
Yeah, so great question. So one of the things I always try to keep in mind, and I share with anybody else, I talk with a lot of veterans, and they often ask this question. The the best that I can offer is show and demonstrate that you're a safe place to share anything that's on a veteran's mind. And this is true
Mm,
for everybody, but they often say that our sickness is in our secrets. And a lot of the challenges that we face and that continue to get worse over time are usually things that we're holding inside that we're afraid to share or we don't know how to share. This is back to that connection and authenticity piece. So, as best as I
mm,
can, anytime I'm talking with somebody else who's going through a hard situation, or the best that anybody can, just help provide a safe place, show as much compassion and lack of judgment, realize the blessing or the gift that it is for somebody to express something to you that they're not willing to or feel safe to share somewhere else. And a lot of the times we can be harder on ourselves for the things that we're thinking, especially if it's something that we're contending with. So if we have that opportunity to share that with somebody else and we don't automatically or immediately feel rejected, there's a tremendous amount of power that can come from that experience. So as much as we can, you know, just offer a safe place without, prying questions, just anything you can do to continue the conversation or allow the conversation, or have no conversation at all. Just show that, hey, you're somebody that's willing to show up and you're capable of showing up without judgment, being compassionate, understanding that somebody is going through a situation that you haven't been through, so you don't fully understand it. But regardless, you're willing to be there for an individual as they're going through it. That's a tremendous step forward in helping kind of provide that space and help somebody feel seen. This all comes back to those basic fundamental human needs. We have a need for connection. If somebody's really been struggling, they've been holding something inside and that's been compounding over time, they're not sure where to express it, that whole time, that sense of connection that they have is evaporating. So anything that we can do to help facilitate that and bring that back. And of course, we got to recognize our limits and our boundaries. And if we're not licensed mental health professionals, then certainly there's going to be times where the need exceeds our capacity to help and support. So when you can build that rapport, build that connection, demonstrate that you're a safe and non-judgmental place to be, then it might open the door to offer some help. And one of the biggest things that I've seen like I said, I work a lot in the addiction recovery field, and there's a tremendous number of individuals, adults in America, about 28 to 30 million adults in America that are struggling with some form of addiction. For every one of those 30 million individuals, they have, there's dozens of people whose lives are affected by that one individual who's struggling. So it's very common for somebody to reach out and say, hey, I need you to come, fix my loved one, my brother, my cousin, my nephew, my spouse. And the reality is, unless somebody starts a journey to an improved mental health state or an improved state with a substance that they've struggled with, unless that individual starts that own journey and it's self-directed and they want to do it, the chance that it's going to be successful is almost zero. So I say that to say, if you think that your friend is in a very difficult place, or a veteran that is in a very difficult place, you can't force them to go seek help or to get help unless they kind of come to that conclusion on their own. I think of, was it Dale Carnegie who wrote, remind me, is that the author of How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yes.
Yeah. So in there, he says, if you convince an individual against their will, they're of the same opinion still. So the truth is, like, we can't convince somebody else to have buy-in on, on making a change or doing something in their life. However, sometimes you can plant the seed for that and you can allow it to grow in their own life when you help, again, show that safe place, show that place that, that you're willing to, they can share their deepest, darkest secrets, and you still love and accept them as an individual. That can go a tremendous way to encouraging somebody to see the value that they have and be willing to take that step. Oh, and resources I always like to remind individuals of. So there's a recent act that was passed called the Compact Act. And one of the provisions of this was any military member who's ever served in combat who has any mental health related issues, they can go to any mental health facility, whether it's an ER, whether it's a treatment facility, and they can get help there to be seen for their mental health crisis.
Wow.
So that's open to anybody. That can be a big barrier, is, okay, somebody's willing, they're ready, but we don't know where to go. We don't know what number to call. Well, just through that Compact Act, you can go to any ER, any mental health treatment place and receive care.
Create a safe space to share secrets. It sounds simple, Garret, but I could see how that could be really, really important, because once, they think they can be, like you said, there's not shown any compassion or judgment, they're not going to want to share. They're not going to want to open.
Yeah. Well, and it takes, these are things that we study and practice all the time. What has helped to be a lot in that is a few things. One, knowing that somebody's emotions or their thoughts, that's not who they are. Somebody is not their emotion. If somebody's angry, if somebody's resentful, if somebody's frustrated, that's not who they are. That's a feeling that they have. I also understand that every other individual in the world is living a different experience than I've experienced. And one of the things that I really came to understand and believe, even while I was deployed in Afghanistan, was that I think, often there's this question, nature or nurture. How do we develop? Is it our nature? Is it our nurture? I think it's some combination of the two. And one of the beliefs that I've come to accept and understand is that I think I would be very much like any other individual had I been born in their situation and lived their life experiences up to that point. And this helps me. So if somebody has a different belief than my own, or a different feeling, or a different desire than my own, or has had different experiences or different reactions in their life, I try to remember this, because this helps me see and accept that, okay, maybe they're different than me. Maybe they have some different desires, some different beliefs, but I do believe that I would be much more similar to them had I been, through every experience that they've had, through every challenge, through every battle, through every opportunity that they've had. I believe that I would come to that same conclusion or something very similar to it. So that helps me connect with other individuals, even if there's nothing similar about us. And then also, I realize, and this is something that I use to help myself and also help me connect with other individuals. I realize that each of us is always doing the best that we can in any situation or circumstance with the level of awareness, the energy, the tools, whatever the skills that we have at that time. So this is one thing I try to recognize in myself, especially if I look back at mistakes or upsets that I've had or wish that I'd have done things differently in the past. I give myself a little grace and realize that, I was doing the best that I could to meet a basic human need. And had I had a different level of awareness, had I had some more skills or resources available to me, maybe I could have made a different decision, but I didn't. So I did the best that I could. And I mean, nobody's trying to do less than what they can. Nobody's intentionally trying to do things to create negative consequences, in their lives or the lives of others. But what we do is we seek to meet our own basic human needs through whatever capacity we have. So the other side of that is, if we're going to give ourselves that grace, we have to recognize that every other human being is also going through a similar experience. And if they're not showing up the way that we want them to, they're acting in a way that we don't want them to, we've got to recognize and give them the same grace that they're doing the best that they can with what they have and what they're capable of in that moment.
What a wonderful sentiment. I think if we all kind of, we don't know the battles people are going through, right? When we bump into them in the grocery store or wherever, or,
Absolutely.
they cut you off in traffic or something, we don't know. And it's a really good point. If I grew up the way they did and with their experiences, I certainly would be a different person. What is a recovery coach, Garret?
So that's a great question. So if we think about the mental health world, the treatment world, we often think about licensed clinical professionals. We talk a lot about therapists and counselors, psychiatrists. So what I understand is that licensed clinical professionals, they often operate in the world of traditional psychology. So traditional psychology, I understand it as the science of and the practice of working with individuals to help them identify things that are wrong with them or wrong with their life. They might be symptoms, they might be diagnoses, and helping them identify these things and then mitigate the negative effects of them so that they can experience a better version of their life. Well, on the other side of that, there's a field of a positive psychology, and this is really where non-clinical, so whether you're coaches, whether you're a peer support specialist, mentors, really our focus in the field that we work in is helping somebody identify what's right with them. So what are the strengths? What are the skills? What are the things that are going well in their life? What can we learn from that? And how do we leverage these things to make positive change and growth happen in our lives? So with that context, one analogy I love to share a lot is think of a hot air balloon. So if you have a hot air balloon sitting on the ground and you want to take flight, you can either remove the sandbags to remove some of the drag or remove some of the weight that's holding that hot air balloon down. Another thing that you can do is you can put some more propane in the tank, put some more fire into the hot air, and create a greater sense of lift to lift up. When I think of traditional psychology or therapists, licensed clinical professionals, I think, hey, these individuals are really focusing on what's holding somebody back. What are the negative things that are weighing them down and addressing that? Whereas on the, as a recovery coach or an individual coach, performance coach, it's really a focus on how do we get some more hot air into that balloon? How do we create more lift? How do we leverage what we already have, tap into that potential we already have, and get to a better place? And with that analogy, it's easy to see how they can be very complementary. So somebody who's worked with a coach in the past, might also be working with a mental health professional. I typically work with both, at different times. So there's certainly a benefit or a complementary nature to be had there, but it's both have the desire to help somebody get to a better place in their life. It's really just kind of two approaches or two different perspectives going about it. So for me, as a recovery coach, I often work with individuals that have struggled with addiction in their life, and maybe they've gone to treatment, maybe they've gone to a self-help group or support group, and they've found a way to start their recovery journey, but they quickly realize that they're limited by a lot of the thoughts or a lot of the habits, a lot of the patterns that they've had in their past, and they want to help transform some of that so they can get to a better place. Typically, I'll work with individuals, maybe they've been in recovery for 6 or 12 months, and whatever that honeymoon period was, whatever, kind of was exciting them, and the changes that they were experiencing early on, they realize that at some point that begins to plateau, and they need to be introduced to some additional tools and resources and support to continue that journey. And one question I often get is, of all the coaching and performance and support that you can do in the human potential field, why on earth would you choose to work with, a population of people that have struggled with addiction? And really the answer to that is, I think of life in many ways like a pendulum. And I think the further that pendulum swings in one direction, of despair, of anger, of frustration, of pain, of heartache, when you get it swinging back in the other way, it has that much more potential to swing into compassion, understanding, grit, strength, and all of the positive things that can really lead somebody to a beautiful place in their life.
I get to talk to a lot of therapists and coaches, and as far as I could see, of course, they want to help. They want to help whoever they're working with, but therapists kind of look back, and coaches look forward. Is that fair?
That's a big aspect of it too, and I think that's perfectly articulated. So a therapist will look at things that happened in your past and how they're affecting you today, whereas a coach, maybe that some of that stuff will come up to provide context, but for coaches, it's really like, all right, what's going on today? What do you have? What can we evolve? And how do we get to a better place for tomorrow?
Mm. And what's the difference between coaching somebody with addiction and someone with trauma?
So that's a great question. So first and foremost, I would challenge you to find anybody who's struggled with addiction who doesn't have trauma in their
Oh,
past.
right.
And
Yeah.
there's this one term that goes around that I hear often, which is co-occurring disorders, which talks about somebody who has a substance use
Mm.
disorder or a behavioral addiction problem that also occurs with a mental health diagnosis. And though I understand it and I can appreciate why that term is used, I also challenge anybody to find somebody who's struggled with addiction who doesn't have some other mental health challenge that
Mhm.
they're facing, whether it's the effects of previous traumas, whether it's an anxiety disorder, whether it's depression. Like there's going to be something else going on there. Um, but the difference for me is, I don't know, I have a very broad view on what addiction is, how it manifests. I love the definition by Dr. Gabor Mate, who shares that his definition of addiction is that addiction manifests in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure in, has a negative consequence because of, and
Mm.
yet has difficulty giving it up. So
Mm.
it's a pretty long definition, but this
Broad.
one beautiful definition is
Mm.
the most concise way that I've ever heard this understanding of addiction articulated. And two things I really gained from that definition. One is that it helps me see and appreciate that addiction isn't something that manifests in this arbitrary short list of substances and
Mm.
behaviors that we often
Mm.
think of as addiction. Addiction manifests in any behavior that a person craves and yet has a negative consequence because of. And when I think of it in that context, I really see how addiction manifesting in somebody's life in this context is really a part of our human nature. So I also think of it as the relationship between seeking something external to your body to create or synthesize an internal feeling or response. Whether
Hmm.
that thing is alcohol or it's meth or it's opioids, or maybe that external thing is your Netflix binging at night. I got to stop, calling on Netflix. Okay, maybe your Amazon Prime binging or your Hulu binging, whatever it is. But anytime you're seeking or you're relying on something external to you to create or soothe some kind of internal feeling or pain, to me, it's all related. Now, each substance and behavior is going to have different consequences or different reactions. Some are going to accelerate a downward spiral much more quickly than another. But when I come back to this thought of relying on something external to create or synthesize an internal response with a negative consequence, well, at the end of the day, let's recognize what those consequences are and how can we reduce those consequences. The other thing that I get from Dr. Gabor Mate's definition is his pinpointing on the word relief. So relief from what? So if we are needing relief from something, then what is that something? And many times it manifests as an internal emotional pain or a physical pain. So if we can focus on why the pain or what's causing that need for escape or numbing or avoiding, if we can address what that need is, that unmet need or that source of pain, this is the only way that we're going to move
Mm.
beyond and provide a long-term potential for somebody in their recovery. So The difference between dealing with somebody with trauma or somebody with addiction, I don't know that there is one. It's just, how do these symptoms manifest in their life? What are the behaviors and the symptoms? But it both ties back to some kind of internal pain and an inability to deal with or kind of reconcile the life that they're living, the goals and aspirations that they have, and their ability to get there. And if you want to dig into trauma, so I'll say first and foremost, I'm not a licensed mental health professional, but I do speak a lot about trauma, especially when I'm talking about that military transition. And the way that I understand trauma, this isn't a Webster's definition. There's libraries and libraries about the topic of trauma, but the way that I understand it in most simple form is that trauma occurs when a person has an event or a circumstance that creates a fundamental shift in their values, their beliefs, or their understanding of the world and their place in it.
Wow.
So one example might be an individual that's in a horrific car accident. Maybe one day they get in the car with a loved one and they're driving to the store to go pick up some groceries, and they experience a horrific car accident. Maybe that loved one passes away as a result of that car accident. Well, this individual, before that moment in time, they lived in a world where you could generally get into a car, you could travel on vacation, you could run to the store, and you didn't have to worry about something horrific happening. From that day forward, they now realize that they're not living in that world they thought they were. They're living in a world where horrific and terrible things can happen, sometimes even unexpectedly, and there's real consequences from it. So I think that the effects of somebody who's experienced or has experienced trauma is almost an inability to reconcile. Okay, there's this world, there's this framework, there's this understanding I thought I was a part of, and now this value or this belief that I have has been proven to be false, to be incorrect. So one of the challenges is like, okay, how do I reassociate, or how do I align myself with this reality that I'm now finding myself in? It's also challenging because, okay, there was one value or fundamental belief that I had about the world, and that was proven wrong. So what other fundamental values and beliefs do I have about the world that might also be wrong? And that can be a very disassociating and disorienting kind of perspective to be in. And this is where somebody living through this new lens and trying to navigate this new world that they find themselves in, they will experience some of those symptoms of the traumatic experience, whether that's, they often say, an abnormal response to normal stimuli. Well, if you had normal responses to normal stimuli in this old framework, and now you find yourself in a new framework and you don't really understand the rules or the values or the beliefs that define this new world that you find yourself in, well, then of course you might have what somebody else would perceive as an abnormal response to a normal stimuli. And then there's many other things I understand about, what is traumatic and what is not traumatic. I always think of it's individually defined. So two individuals might have the exact same or very similar experiences happen to them. For one individual, it's traumatic. For one individual, it's not. And I think that comes back to, did that person experience something from their perspective that created a fundamental shift in their values, beliefs, or understanding? If they did, then I would venture to say that that was probably a traumatic experience for them. If they did not, if they're just like, that was very stressful, I recoup, I withdraw, and none of my fundamental values, beliefs, or understandings were altered, then maybe it wasn't traumatic for that individual.
Your brand deserves to be in front of the right audience decision makers, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are ready to take action. That's exactly who listens to the Joey Pinz podcast. Thousands of engaged business leaders and consumers tune in every week. Millions of views and listens across YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Sponsors see real impact, higher engagement, brand trust, and conversations. We offer strategic partnerships tailored to your goals, including targeted ad placements, branded guest appearances, multi-episode and event sponsorships. Make your brand part of the conversation. Let's grow together. Visit joeypinz.com/sponsor to explore sponsorship opportunities, or email us at sales@joeypinz.com. The Joey Pinz podcast, where brands and thought leaders connect. Astounding what goes into trauma and what it can do to somebody. If we go back to transitioning from military to civilian, is it similar to what we're talking about? It's just that, I heard you talk about, you were trained in all these skills, but how are they going to translate in the civilian world? How are you going to acclimate? You entered in as an 18-year-old, my goodness, just a young kid. Garret, and now you're an adult 15 years later, 20 years later, and now you have to shift the way you work, how you accountable, and how you report, etc. How can we help in that area?
Well, I think this kind of ties it together a lot of what we've talked about. So yes, I certainly do, and this is why I believe that experience can be traumatic. So an individual that's 18 or 22 years old that joins the military, they learn to they learn a framework of values and beliefs and an understanding of themselves and their place in the world based on a certain set of values and and sense of identity that comes from that military service. And when we're taken out of that, and now we find ourselves in another world, in a civilian world, where some of those values that we had, maybe that level of intensity, maybe our relationship with humor that other people might not find humorous.
Mm,
There's a lot of things that that have become a part of us and part of our understanding of the world and our place in it that have been altered. So that's the same disorienting effect of trying to now figure out and navigate this new world and doing it at a time that you're unexpected. So how do other individuals better understand and support this? I think it comes back to a lot of what we were talking about before, understanding that every individual is living through a unique experience, and that through the experiences that they've had in the past, they've developed a certain set of values and beliefs and understanding. And anybody that you encounter that maybe they are a little aggravating to you, or maybe their behaviors or their mannerisms or their sense of intensity, maybe that's a little aggravating. Understanding that they're doing the best that they can with what they've learned, with what they've developed, with the skill sets that they have, with the framework that they're using, they're doing the best that they can to demonstrate their value and to meet their basic fundamental human needs. And
mm,
realizing that if we had been through a similar experience, we might be acting much the same as they do.
mm. And what can we do as civilians better to help that transition? Whether we own a small business or whether we're a work colleague, what can we do? I guess it really comes down to what you just said. Try to understand what that person's gone through. Try to live in their shoes.
Yeah, I think so. Or just providing a little bit of grace and understanding. I don't know. One thing that I often do is I question if I'm ever challenged with something, or if I feel like somebody is doing or thinking or saying the wrong thing, or they believe the wrong thing, whatever the wrong thing might mean. It's an opportunity I find to question myself on, how did I develop the belief that I had?
I see.
How is this belief correct, or is this belief correct? Is this philosophy correct, or is this philosophy correct? So there's always an opportunity for us to be a little bit more introspective before we label that behavior is wrong, that tone of language is wrong, that level of intensity is wrong.
Mm,
That's not the way that we do things. Let's give some grace and understand, okay, how do we come to develop the values and beliefs that we have? Are those values and beliefs in fact true? Are they serving us in the best way, to the best capacity? I was at a conference the other week with a lot of individuals that work with veterans, and one of the things that they talked about was um, the language that veterans often use, especially when talking about their military experience, and how the language and some of the vocabulary that's used can be quite abrasive to individuals that are not used to it.
mm,
And what I saw and what I felt was this immediate judgment that that language is wrong, that language is incorrect, that language is not acceptable. And I was kind of right there with them until I came back and I kind of hit pause, and I was like, well, who says that it's
mm,
wrong? Like, who says that it's incorrect? Because I also understand the weight that comes with this judgment that somebody else's behavior is incorrect. It's a judgment against that individual. It's a judgment against their identity. It's a judgment against who they've become.
mm,
And that doesn't do anything to help foster connection. And it's really disempowering and really, really limiting to another individual. It can be, uh, you know, I don't not derogatory, repressing. It can be extremely
mm,
repressing to another person to say that these values and beliefs and who you are and your identity is somehow wrong or it's incorrect. Now maybe there's opportunities for modification there, but if you want to help somebody make a change or see things more like you're not going to do that by judging them up
mm,
front and really casting that wall between the two of you. If you want somebody to see things more the way that you do, well, then lean into them, find some
mm,
connection, find some
mm.
rapport, and you're going to be in a space where they might listen to you and might value you. But if the first thing that you do is come across with judgment, well, that person's not really going to care the next thing that you have to say.
Garrett, how'd you make the transition from civilian life to recovery coach?
So great question. So really through my own journey, so through my own mental health challenges and challenges with substances, and then as I mentioned, I was introduced to some brilliant coaching and mentorship,
Mm,
which helped me. really kind of put some pieces of myself back together, relieve some of those pains, fill some of those voids that was my source of pain that I was trying to escape from. And through that, I was so inspired by the transformative value of that, and really the value, it's especially if you're somebody who's been in a lot of pain and been in a bad place, you can more often recognize that in other individuals. So something that I found is true of a lot of individuals that have struggled with addiction. They tend to be extremely empathetic individuals. Now, maybe it doesn't, the empathy doesn't come across in their actions, but their ability to feel what somebody else is going through, they can be very much in tune with that, whether that's fear, whether that's sadness, whether that's worry, whether that's shame, self-doubt, can be very in tune with that. So I think maybe through my own journey, I became very attuned to a lot of the interpersonal challenges or intrapersonal challenges that other individuals were going to. So I was really inspired to say, okay, I went through my journey for a reason, and maybe I can make some benefit or draw some benefit from that, from sharing some things that I had shared with other individuals. So I had my own struggles with substances and with different behaviors, but I didn't go through a traditional treatment route. So what I think this afforded me was an opportunity to see some other things that were out there, some other perspectives, some other tools, some other approaches that were out there that helped foster my journey. And then when I started talking to other friends that went through more of a traditional treatment, and I saw some of the things that they were struggling with, or some of the tools or some of the processes they were going through, I found a real opportunity to kind of bring the two worlds together and help provide even more empowerment or more opportunities for individuals who have struggled in the past to reach more into their potential and to experience a better version of their life. So I think that was really the inspiration for it.
When a civilian says thank you for your service, is that good? Is that a compliment?
For a number of years, it would make me want to do things that I won't mention here on this podcast. But no, for a number of years, it was really bothersome, because now I've moved beyond that, but I also understand and recognize why other veterans don't feel that way. So my advice to civilians, certainly do it. Try to do it in the most authentic and meaningful way, not as a passing, like, how you doing?
Right.
But also understand that can be very aggravating for individuals, because now I've mostly moved beyond this. But for me, when I used to hear thank you for your service, it felt so empty. It felt so fake. It felt so superficial, because I also understood that the individual many times that was saying that had no idea what it entails to be in the service, has no idea the level of sacrifice that's made, has no idea why there's 70 to 80% divorce rates, why there's mental health challenges 200% greater than the civilian population, why the suicide rate is skyrocketing, what it means to spend years of your life away from loved ones at 3, 6, and 12-month increments. They don't realize the level of pain and suffering and sacrifice that comes with that. So for me, it was kind of a reminder to that when I would hear those words. Now, with much greater compassion and understanding, I appreciate it. And I appreciate somebody for taking the time to say it. I used to really kind of blow it off and not even acknowledge it, because it was just kind of aggravating to me. But I understand that if, any civilian, anybody who says that it's coming from a good place, and right, they might not understand the full depth, the reality that I understand, but that's not their fault. Right. And they're trying to do the right thing by recognizing the service. So with that, now I often just say thank you, look them in the eye, say thank you, and leave it at that. But I also know other veterans that it's one of the, the bigger irritations in their life for some of the same reasons.
Yeah, you want to appreciate as a civilian, you want to show appreciation, but you don't want to be, like you say, empty and kind of, inauthentic. Has there been anything in the last month or so, Garret, that you changed your mind on?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll have to look back at some. I don't know. I don't think anything I've changed my mind on, but a lot of lessons that I've learned in the past that I'm having opportunities to continue to learn and be reminded of. Back to that, thank you for your service thing. For any, I know there's a lot of well-meaning and and good-hearted civilians out there that might want to say that. If you do, please do it. Take an opportunity to make it mean something more. Make some eye contact, pause after it, and make sure that it's demonstrated that you're meaning it with authenticity and you're meaning it with sincerity. And I think that can mitigate and any chance that it might offend somebody.
So I started my business in the 90s, Garret. I think I'm a little bit older than you, and I was working way too hard. I was working, 14, 16-hour days with not no, nothing for you, I'm sure. And not paying attention to my weight or my health priorities, putting in the back seat. I'm in front of the doctor. I'm at 340 pounds, and she says to me, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. I'd let myself go. So I'm driving home upset with myself, spent the next 6, 7 months, lost 130 pounds and kept it off. Now, when I tell people this story, what's your secret? What'd you do? And there's no secret, Garrett. Discipline. We alluded to
Mm.
her earlier. I got routine, I got motivation. That's how I kept it off. How does discipline play a role in your life, Garret Biss?
Well, that's a great question. Before we dig into that, I want to pull back revisit something that we talked about with the definition of addiction. Again, when we hear this word, many times that we have this word association with all these horrible substances or
Mm,
these bad
mm,
behaviors. There's also some very socially acceptable, almost socially rewarded or celebrated addictive behaviors. If we come back to that definition of any behavior that manifests that helps provide temporary relief or pleasure in, but has a negative consequence as a result of,
mm.
workaholism, something that comes top of mind to me. And again,
Huh.
it's not that workaholism is good or bad. It's not that any substance or behavior I don't believe is good or bad. It's somebody's relationship to it. And if we are so engaged or so pulled into something because there's some internal thing inside of us that says maybe I'm not good enough if I don't get a little bit more done, or until I demonstrate my value, or until the marketplace validates me. If there's some kind of void inside that's leading us into that behavior, then even something that can be celebrated in our society can have the same relationship as an addictive substance or behavior. So you talked about some negative consequences that you had as a result of, and you unfortunately you had a wake up call and you're able to make some changes. So, and now to answer your question, so what is discipline, or how does it show up in my life? When I think of discipline, I think of, there's a couple different messages or lessons that I've learned that have really kind of stuck with me. I think first and foremost, I'm a huge fan of Jim Rohn. For anybody who's not familiar with his work, so he talks about discipline a lot, and he says one thing to know and appreciate about discipline is that one discipline affects the rest. And this is something I always try to leverage in the coaching that I do, and even in my personal life, is sometimes we can be inspired or encouraged to make drastic, wide sweeping changes in every area of our life. For anybody who's ever picked up a new self-help book, or they've been to a seminar or spent a couple of days in a workshop, you might come away from it with, a notebook of like, oh, I'm going to make these 10 changes in my life, and I'm going to make sure, and then everything in my life is going to transform. Well, I understand that desire to do so, but I also understand that many times if we try to change too many things, there is a relationship between discipline and willpower. I
Mm.
understand that willpower is kind of the bridge between a habit,
Hmm.
discipline is our ability to enact that willpower. So if we have discipline, that means we can leverage the willpower that we have to change a behavior which is not yet a habit. And then once that behavior becomes a habit, it no longer requires that level of discipline. It doesn't require that exhaustion of willpower. But what I also know about willpower and about our ability to enact discipline. So if willpower is our fuel, if discipline is the phone that we have, and our willpower is the battery on that phone, that battery has a finite life. So our ability to enact this discipline or to create these changes in our life, it's not an unlimited resource. Our willpower can fluctuate throughout the day, throughout the week. If we get sick, we might not have as much willpower. So understanding this is extremely important as we're mapping out changes that we want to make in our life. And if we realize that we have a limited amount of willpower and limited capacity to enact discipline, then it becomes really important to find like, okay, what are those keystone habits, or what are those keystone changes that I want to make so that I can start swinging this pendulum in the other direction, so I can change the tides. And what I have come to find through my own experience, and this ties back to Jim Rohn's quote, is that even if I can find one or two major changes that I want to make in my life, new habits that I want to create, new disciplines that I want to enact, if I can find one or two, without even thinking about anything else in my life, other things tend to line up. When I
Hmm.
get really strict with my diet, for whatever reason, not even thinking about it, my financial discipline starts to fall in line a little bit.
Hmm.
When I get really disciplined on a workout routine, I tend to eat a little bit healthier, even if I'm not thinking about it. So with this understanding, it can be really important. Like, let's find one or two things that we want to change, and realize that those can be catalysts for changing other things in our life. The other thing I understand of discipline and its relationship is that, it's much like a muscle. And the less that we use it, it can begin to atrophy and weaken over time.
Mm,
And the more that we use it, the more we can kind of strengthen it up. And I think that's why one discipline affects the rest. So what I try to do is invite into my life something that's difficult. And right now, and for the past more than a year, I've been waking up every morning and jumping in the ice bath. And it requires a tremendous amount of discipline. Fortunately, typically, right when we wake up, it's the time when we have the most willpower. So finding this habit or this behavior change that you want to make and trying to do it at a time where you got the greatest chance of, the greatest willpower, then you're going to have the greatest chance that you'll be able to follow through on it. But doing this one hard thing each day is something that helps keep that discipline muscle alive, I believe, and helps affect the willpower that I have throughout the rest of the day. And
ice
if you
bath.
think that's crazy, I don't know, try a cold shower or try, just try any other hard thing that you want to do. And if there is some massive change that you want to make in your life, if you have a book that you want to write, or if you have some new thing that you want to do, a new workout routine, understand that willpower fluctuates. Your ability to enact that discipline fluctuates throughout the day, and pick the time in the day that it's going to work best for you. Everybody knows if you try to start a new workout routine and your plan is that on your way home from work, you're going to go to the gym every day. Well, maybe some days you're going to find that's possible, but very quickly you're going to find that you're drained beyond the point where you don't have that willpower or that discipline. This also helps me understand why, as we're making some changes in our life, maybe we're really cleaning up our diet, how we can do so well eating, salads and chicken breasts and hard-boiled eggs all day long. But then at 10 o'clock at night, it's damn near impossible to say no to that ice cream or that bag of potato chips because we fully exhausted our willpower.
Yeah, the ice bath. Good for you. Good for you, Garrett. I've haven't done ice bath, but I do the last minute of my shower. I put it to cold, and
There you go. Yeah, I've
you know,
found such profound benefits from that, and
yeah,
it's
feels
incredible.
good.
It's terrible for a couple of seconds, and then it's
Sure,
not too bad. But then you feel amazing when it's over with.
you really do. What motivates you, Garrett?
Hmm. From a positive context or a negative context?
What motivates you?
Said positively or negatively?
You
So
choose.
motivates me. I want to
You
make a greater
choose.
impact in the world. I want to help other people, alleviate or prevent some of the pain and suffering that I've experienced, so everybody can enjoy a better version of their life. So I think that's maybe the positive context. If we want to get more authentic than from a negative place, I think that there's a part of me that wants to feel like I'm enough, wants to feel like I'm doing enough and using enough, doing enough with my life to be deserving of some of the benefits and the blessings that I've had along my way.
Mhm.
When I was, probably maybe the first moment that I think about, I was 10 years old and I was in a bicycle accident and I had a subdural hematoma and was rushed in for a 8-hour brain surgery. And
Wow.
um, after in my recovery, I remember my dad talking to the neurosurgeon who was he was the best neurosurgeon on call. He was the guy anytime somebody was in the Wilmington, Delaware area, anytime the president or a dignitary was in the Wilmington, Delaware area, he was the guy that was on call because he was the foremost neurosurgeon in his field. So in my recovery, my dad had a conversation with him and he said, "How do you explain, you were telling me that while my son was on the operating table or right after the operation, you were telling me that my son was likely going to be a vegetable, probably a paraplegic, and very slim chance I would make a full recovery if I recovered at all." And here I was 4 days after the surgery. I was doing wheelies in my wheelchair up and down the hallways in the hospital in front of the nurse's station. And months later, that there was no sign that there was any challenge from that neurosurgery. And my dad asked him. He said, "How do you explain this? Like, the results were much more grim than what we're seeing." And he said, "Well, in my 30 years of experience and everything I know about neurosurgery," he said, I can't explain it medically. So the only way I can explain it is that there's something beyond me, something beyond this world that made this decision." So that's been a motivator. And I think it's also weighed on me throughout my life to make sure that the things that I do and the contribution that I make and the value that I add to this world is deserving of that and many other blessings that I've experienced in my life.
Looking for a powerful way to reach business leaders and engage consumers? The Joey Pinz podcast connects brands like yours with an audience that listens, engages, and takes action. High impact exposure with a fast growing loyal audience. Millions of views and listens across major platforms. Sponsors see increased brand awareness, trust, and conversations. We make sponsorships simple and effective with custom ad placements that fit your brand, deep audience engagement through authentic conversations, long-term exposure across podcast platforms and social media. Don't miss the opportunity to connect with your ideal customers. Visit joeypinz.com/sponsor to secure your sponsorship today. Or you can email us at sales@joeypinz.com. The Joey Pinz Podcast, where conversations drive results. That's wonderful, Garret. Incredible. So given that motivation, how do you measure success?
I think success is measured in staying true to yourself and not giving up. So I don't think success is necessarily something that's experienced in a moment. Certainly we have projects that are completed, or we have things that we deliver, or experiences that we have, or moments that we experience. But I think success is really found in that continuous journey, continuing to try to evolve, trying to learn, trying to grow, and take on the next challenge, or sticking with the challenge. I think back to that work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, and he talks about there's different ways to find meaning in life. One of them is experiencing something or someone. Another is through making a creation. And another way that we find meaning is through the attitude that we take towards some of the suffering that we have to experience. So I think success is continuing to live with and find that meaning throughout our life, even when times are hard, and leaning into that challenge, leaning into that suffering, accepting it, accepting the benefits and the positives that come with it, and also accepting the challenges that come along with it. And I think success is continuing to lean into what you're most passionate about and what drives you, even through, you're a business owner. I'm a business owner, even through years when it doesn't seem that the outside world is recognizing, the value that you're providing, or you might feel like you're off track. Kind of listening to yourself and continuing to lean into where you feel most called.
Garret, I was really excited when we set this up. I love what you're doing. I mean, you can help yourself, and then move on and do something else. But those that not only help themselves, but learn how to help others is, I think, a trait of a remarkable person. I really value our time together. Thank you so much. Anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you?
Great way to connect is on LinkedIn. So I'm the only Garret Biss, and I know you and I are connected on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. I would recommend and encourage and please and welcome anybody. I'm asking you, I'm begging you, go check out this TEDx talk and share it with any veterans or veteran loved ones that you know. You can find me at garretbiss.com as well. And actually, I do have something that I'd love to share with your audience for anybody that's interested. So of all the things that I've been exposed to and that have helped me out and that I've seen help other individuals out, I went and I found 4 of the most efficacious and fast working daily practices or interventions or exercises that somebody can do in a day. And I put it all together in something called the Warrior Reset. So for anybody that's interested, you can go to thewarriorreset.com, and I'll allow your audience free access to that. But what you'll find there is you'll find 4 daily practices. They take less than 15 minutes a day to do all 4 of them. But these are the things that can create the greatest emotional, physiological, and spiritual, in some ways, benefit to your life. So if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling like you need a little bit of refinement, you want to change something up, but you're not really sure what to try or what to do, go check this out. Try it out for 10 days. And I know you'll experience some dramatic impact and positive benefit in your life.
Very cool. And it's Garret, Garret, 2 R's, 1 T, Biss, BISS, GarretBiss.com. Of course, like you said, on LinkedIn. Heck, you got great content on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. Garret, thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in your neck of the woods, we'll get together and have a cup of tea.
I look forward to it. I really appreciate this. I appreciate this platform that you've created and this opportunity to share some things to help other individuals and inspire them. And I really appreciate you and this chance to chat.
Thank you so much. You be well. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with 1 or 2 of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources, and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.